Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another rip-roaring good time here on Breakdowns for Breakfast. I am Monster, and joining me, as always, is Danger. Say hello, Danger.
Hello, Danger.
Today, we've got an interesting record for you. I've made no secret of my love for nu metal.
No, you haven't.
And this morning, we're going to talk about, I don't want to say one of my favorite nu metal records, but one that I find very, very interesting. September 7th, 1999's Coal Chamber's second album, Chamber Music. Danger, any familiarity with Coal Chamber or this record in particular?
So I remember when Coal Chamber hit the scene. I remember, was it their first album that had the truck on it, like the ice cream truck sort of thing? Yeah.
Yep.
And I remember when this album came out. Now, I don't want to say I remembered this album or Coal Chamber as a whole because of what they sounded like. I remember them because my friends were into them. I do remember listening to them somewhat, but I was never a big Coal Chamber person. They just never really did it for me. And I don't want to say that that's because of the music. I don't know. I just had stuff going on and I was in my own world. Of course, I was always listening to more than just a section of music. I was listening to an overall. And at this time, I think I was in my second year of 8th grade. And
so their first album came out in 1997.
Yeah.
Which, I would have been 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah.
And this was one of those bands that really, looking at the album is why I bought it. Like because I bought the first record, I hadn't heard anything off of it, but the weird colored ice cream truck with the creepy guy driving it, and then the back. For anybody that's not familiar, especially their first couple records, Coal Chamber were the goth kids from your high school. They wore fishnet shirts. They had dozens of facial piercings, weird neon colored hair. I mean, they were like, nobody else looked like that, especially in this genre.
So this album, I do want to talk about what this album cover was and then also what you were just talking about. But in a 2023 eye of looking back at this album cover, it is quite clear that this album cover was created with word and clip art.
You're talking about their first album, right?
Well, I was talking about the first album, just the cover. I remember that vividly, that truck. But this album, Chamber Music, the Coal Chamber logo on it, the Chamber Music, like it's just very
not great.
Nope, it's not. Although it is an interesting thing that they put somebody with a cello, an angel with a cello on the cover of it. I think that was an interesting choice. But this album sounds like 1999, 2000 Hot Topic buckles and jinkos.
Oh, it most certainly does.
Yes. That's what you that's what you get when you see, like, if you watch a clip of them live, you get that look. Like they were, I feel like they were probably sponsored by Hot Topic. Or do you remember, oh hell, I'm forgetting the other. There was another store at the mall that was like the goth.
One that I used to like was called Gadzooks.
Gadzooks, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah. It was like the skater goth of Hot Topic.
So we've talked about this before. When you have a genre that's really popular, you have your like genre tier list, TIER, and you've got like your A tier and then your B tier and your C tier. And I think Coal Chamber is a solid B tier. Like they were too weird to ever really break it into the mainstream, but they've always had this really enthusiastic fan base that's always been underground. And a good example of this is they have been, if we were to actually try to go through the history of this band, it is ridiculous. So many breakups and stops and starts. But they pulled it together and performed at that Sick New World Festival in Las Vegas.
Okay, the Nu Metal Festival.
Yes.
Yep.
Which I cannot believe they spelled Sick New World N-E-W and not N-U.
Yeah, it was a missed. It was a missed opportunity, kind of like when they put out the sequel to Now You Could See Me, and they just said Now You Could See Me 2, and instead of Now You Don't. That was a missed opportunity in itself.
But they played, and the crowd went nuts. They played in the middle of the day dark, gloomy nu metal in broad daylight, 90-degree weather, and the crowd went nuts just
Yeah.
because it's Cold Chamber.
Now, if it was that same thing in 99, 2000, half those people would have passed out from wearing all black and jinkos and buckles and, spiked leather boots. And
Now, but what I find so interesting about this album in particular is I was doing a little research, and this album was one of their more successful commercially,
yes.
but I don't think the fans have any love for this album whatsoever, because I was looking at Setlist FM, and they don't play any of these songs. None of
No.
these songs are on regular rotation when they perform. It's all stuff from the first album or the couple records after this one. And I find that really, really interesting.
So
I want to talk about it.
Well, what I thought was strange about this is this is very much so a nu metal album. And one of the issues I have with this album is that it became a very taxing thing at a certain point because it just seemed to be the same sounds. There wasn't a whole lot of mixing it up. Where they did mix it up, they did really shake it up and do something very different. And I think that that's due to the producers on it. I mean, Jay Gordon from Orgy was one of the producers. And
right.
You definitely get the Orgy sound on a couple of them, or you get the Orgy production sound, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and there's I don't have it in front of me, but I believe their guitar player actually plays on one or two of the songs too.
Yeah, he does. So I did find it strange that it was a critical and commercial success, but even being a commercial success, it still didn't sell a ton of albums. I think it only sold like 600 some thousand albums or something like that. Like it was a successful album, but it was not a fan successful album by any means. It wasn't. And, that's going to happen. It's nice to see the opposite of, because we see a lot of critically panned album or movie or show or whatever, and then a, fan favorite, so it's nice to see the opposite of that. But, this was a strange little entry in our pop culture genre.
Yeah. If you listen to all four of Cold Chamber's albums, you'll notice this one sticks out like a sore thumb.
It's a bit bipolar.
It is. The vocalist, is known for his scream and his growl. On the first album, especially on probably their most popular song, Loco, he's almost rapping, but it's real, guttural sounding. And then there's very little of that on chamber music. They go back to that Darkest Days and Rivals. But on this album, there's a lot more clean vocal. The production's a lot cleaner. They decided to add these like atmospheric strings and stuff that they don't do on a lot of the other stuff. And for me, it kind of made it stand out from the pack. And I felt like if they would have embraced this, they would have almost been like the nu metal Cure. Like I felt like they had the opportunity to really stand out from the rest of the nu metal pack at the time. There's still the bounce and the grooves, and you hear the twinge of rap here or there, but this doesn't sound like a Limp Bizkit record, or it does have some similarities to Korn. I hear a lot of the guitar there.
Yes.
But I feel like if they would have embraced the gothic atmosphere a little more like they do on this record, they could have really kind of carved their own niche. But I guess they weren't going to carve anything because they all hated each other and could barely stand to write music together anyway.
So, I feel like this recording of this album had the same animosity. The band had the same animosity with each other as Fleetwood Mac did when recording Rumors, but they were more vocal about it here instead of just writing songs to each other like they did on Rumors.
Right.
But I hear so much Korn in the I wouldn't even say clean vocals. I would say nasally vocals, because it is a clean cleaner sound than we heard from vocals in the past, but his voice is just so nasally. And I would say it's actually more nasally in Jonathan Thomas territory, or Jonathan Davis territory, than in like
Welcome to our
Billy
new episode on
Corgan.
home improvement.
Yeah, yeah. And so, it's more in the Jonathan Davis territory than it is the
Right.
nasally Billy Corgan territory. If that works, that works. Again, I got tired of it.
And I think that they made it very clear on the first record that Dez's vocal styling is going to be this,
Yeah.
and then coming to album 2, they completely abandoned that. And me personally, I've always been a fan of super heavy music with super clean vocals. That's always been something I've loved. And I prefer Dez's clean voice to his screamy voice.
It
So,
worked in a lot of places. It really did.
and it gave the songs a lot more dynamics than any of their other albums have.
Yeah, and it was fine for certain periods and certain times. And I do want to go back to what you were talking about, the atmospheric strings and stuff.
Yeah.
I do think that they put a lot of the strings and all in there, and to have that as a standout part of your album and put a stringed instrument on the cover, I think is like, hey, buy this album and you're gonna get this, and that's fine. But I found they put a lot more synth on this album and just a lot more atmospheric sounds in the background. And there's one track towards the end where I heard a lot of like samples from movies and things, like like there was like a laughter in the background that just obviously wasn't somebody laughing into a microphone, and
right.
That's fine. That's fine.
And I'll go ahead and address something that you mentioned a couple times in passing already. I really like this album. It's why I brought it to the table.
Mm-hmm.
It is too long. It is 16 tracks, and you could have easily taken 2 or 3 out. It gets a little repetitive. Like you said, you hear a lot of the same decisions being made throughout the entire record. And this is one that we've had this conversation about, which part of the album we like, which parts we don't, that kind of thing. For me, this album just starts, just the first 3 or 4 songs are just boom, 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 bangers. I'm in. And then I start to kind of, everything, like you said, starts to get a little bit like, okay, this is cool. I heard this already.
And so I'll say that there's not a lot of standout tracks on this album.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of songs have standout parts.
Yeah.
But, there's maybe 1 or 2 standout tracks that I would put on my liked playlist or something like that, And the interesting thing about this is that had I listened to this when I was 13, 14, 15, I probably would have been all over it.
Yeah.
But at almost 40, damn it, that sucks to say. At almost 40, it just doesn't quite hit the same.
There's a level of when bands try to be like moody and foreboding, and like I referenced The Cure earlier, it can come across as cheesy and corny. CORNY, not KORNY. You gotta make that distinction when you're talking nu metal.
Yes, you do.
And this album gets really close to that in a couple of parts. For me, I was 14 or 15 when I first heard this, so it was kind of like the depressed little brother to the Korn and Limp Bizkit albums I was listening to. So
that's what you get in the B and C tier.
Exactly. You get more niche based. Like this album, Coal Chamber in general, but specifically this album only works for a certain group of people. And being a pretty happy-go-lucky kid, I'm surprised as much as I did enjoy this album when it came out. And I do revisit it from time to time, but this is the first time I actually deep dived, really paid attention to each song in years. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I personally like most of it, but it does get a little bit taxing. It is too long.
Now,
A 16-track new metal album is a feat.
Now, I do want to talk about the track number that you've brought up a couple times before we really dive into it. So, this is a long album, and to the point of where I felt like they were trying to push the album a bit longer in certain places, and that's maybe where we got some of the repetitive sound. And 16 tracks is a long album in general for anybody, but 16 tracks, and it ends with Anything But You, but it does have 2 limited edition bonus tracks if you were to get that one. Now, I know that you and I briefly touched on this before when we were talking about this, but I did nothing for those 2 albums for 17 and 18 because they were not the tracks that you could get if you just bought the album in 1999. Those are not tracks that I have anything to say on.
Same. I actually did not even know that there was a longer version of this until you mentioned that to me. But clocking in at an hour and 16 tracks already, we've got plenty to work with.
Right.
I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, and what was strange is like when I looked up the album on Wikipedia, that's where I saw the other 2 tracks, because just looking on Spotify, those 2 tracks aren't a part of the album. I had to go and find it on Spotify. Like I had to find that specific, release. So anyway.
Now, this is one that I don't know that we necessarily have to do a, deep dive breakdown of every single song necessarily. But what I will say is, and I'll clean this up later in my final thoughts. But another reason I wanted to pick this album is, much like some of the other albums we've talked about, it has a vibe from start to finish.
It does.
It's not a concept record. It's an idea record, like you like to say. It sounds like to me they were like, hey, we're Cold Chamber. This is what we sound like, but we want to make a dark, moody, atmospheric version of Cold Chamber. And by starting the album with Mist, it's just like a 40-second little string intro. It sets the stage perfectly.
Yeah. So I will jump off of what you just said. I don't know if this is necessarily a idea album as much as it is the band had songs and the producers had an idea, because I felt like a lot of these were kind of pushed in a direction by the producers, and that shows they can trust their production team and they can trust their recording engineer and whatnot, which that's nice to see.
And honestly, like if you take out some of the string orchestral stuff, the synth stuff, and you tell Dez to rough up his vocals and not be so clean, this sounds like every other Cold Chamber album. Yeah. But like you said, those production directions that really, make it stand out. So after you got the creepy intro, for me, Tragedy. El Kugai.
Untraceable. I recognize that you're most favored. Untraceable. Tell me now, what are we made of? Untraceable.
And Untrue.
Fear. Where have you been? You've been untrue. I did before and I did good. You've been untrue.
And even into Tyler's song.
The world again. I'm trying. Raise your God again. They don't give a damn. Raise your God again. They don't give a damn. Raise your God.
That 2, 3, 4, 5 stretch is probably my favorite stretch of the album.
I will say that stretch did kind of jump out at me a bit more. And I had never listened to this album before we decided to do this. And so we'll say that jumped out at me. But what jumped out at me about Tragedy,
the crystal, they stick to you like glue. jealous.
Was the vocals kind of had a bit of a vocoder on it. It kind of had a bit of an effect on it, yeah. And the chorus, the stick to you like glue, bit goofy, but it also may have been self-aware and by design. You know, when you have an intro track like Mist, I try not to count that as the first track of the album.
Right.
And so the first track of the album, it's a little goofy, and it after a bit, it feels like it's a self-aware thing where they knew what they were doing. He knew that his lyrics were silly on that. And it's like, okay, I get it. You're a heavy band that is also silly and has a sense of humor, and I can appreciate that.
If you go back and listen, especially the first two albums, once Devil Driver, which for anybody that doesn't know, Dez, the singer of Cold Chamber, is the lead vocalist for Devil Driver, and Meigs, the guitar player for Cold Chamber, is now the guitar player for Gemini Syndrome, which is another great band. They lyrically, Dez has gotten a little more serious, but if you listen to these first two albums, they're very silly.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's being delivered by this facial pierced fishnet shirt wearing bonkers on stage character, it sort of works. Like it's almost like one of their most popular songs is called Big Truck.
Yeah.
And it starts with this weird little guitar like pick scratch, and Dez goes, bitch. And then the song starts. It's like they know that they're being goofy, like the way they look and the way they act and stuff. And the other thing about this song, though, that I think is cool is it just starts. There is no intro. Everything comes in at the same time, which, again, coming out of Mist sort of works in its advantage.
Yeah. And, you know, because Mist does kind of, if you're not paying attention to the fact that it's an intro and you're just listening to it, it acts as an intro to this song. And it flows into it rather well. And something that stuck out to me about this first track, it ends with loops of just random noise. And I was giggling to myself when I wrote my notes because I spelt that Noize because it's a nu metal album. I'm going to give it those spellings.
It's a very strong nu metal spelling.
Yes.
And so then the song after that, El Kugai, is probably my favorite on the record. That riff and that groove is like the sweet spot for me. And this one has a little bit more of a rap kind of vibe to it. This one sounds a little bit more like some of their older stuff and subsequently newer stuff. But there's still that bridge where it gets really like horror movie-esque, you know, and I love that.
So, I mean, I will say the only notes I have for this is it has a catchy chorus, and this track does show that he has a good dynamic of his voice control.
Yes.
And, you know, he does mix growling vocals with the nasally, you know, cleaner in the verses. And that's really it. It was it's a fun song. It's a fine song, but it just, nothing really jumped out at me about this one, except for the fact that he was it felt like he had more control over his voice in that one.
And that's a thing again. Like I like Dez's voice on this album more than any other Cold Chamber record because yes, there is clean vocals on the other records. He's a lot more one note on those albums than he is on this one.
Yeah.
This one, I feel like he's trying different things throughout.
I actually felt like they showed quite a bit of trying to kind of stretch some muscles a bit on this album as a whole. While, yes, we did get a lot of the repetitive sound where they really did something different, they really pushed it a little bit further in different directions.
Yeah. And lyrically as well, because yes, you're right, there are some silly moments lyrically, but also these are a little bit more heartfelt lyrically. Dez is definitely going through some stuff on a few of these songs.
He might be a little depressed.
I get the impression that he was cheated on at some point during the recording of this, and the very next song is called Untrue.
Yep. And then
So-
following that is Tyler's song, so it might be a song about Tyler. I don't know.
Well, okay, so Untrue, I like this one a lot because I love the way it starts. It's got that real, like, thick bass and the weird little high pitched guitar, very Korn vibe on this one.
Very Korn.
Yes, and even the chorus, the way it sort of, the rhythm of the chorus sounds very much like Life is Peachy era Korn, which, okay in my book for sure. But again, there's just this little extra production in the background that gives it this eerie atmosphere that makes it its own thing.
So, I don't feel like this track was needed on this album because
Oh man,
I know, but I felt like, okay, so this track has some of the nu metal hallmarks. You know, it has the chunky, funky bass. You know, that is like the every radio play of a nu metal song from 1999 or 1998 to 2002 had the chunky, funky bass. The guitar, it's almost like they tried to imitate the Metroid soundtrack in the
a little
guitar.
bit, yeah.
Yeah. And then the singer changes his voice within the same track. All of those are hallmarks of Korn.
For sure.
And I felt like it wasn't needed because it took what started as a nu metal album and went, okay, yeah, you're trying to be Korn now. You're trying to be something else. And I felt like that happened a couple times on this album where it was, they were no longer sticking to being Cold Chamber, and they were Cold Chamber trying to be something else.
I can hear that. I can hear that. I guess I was blinded by my undying love of nu metal tropes that
You were.
Untrue just really worked for me.
You
But I
were.
get your point. I get your point.
I know you heard Untrue and you were like, it is untrue that I have a nu metal chubby right now because I'm going to deny that to myself, but it's there. It's very present.
Listen, it's not a limp biscuit. Okay, moving on. You mentioned Tyler's song.
In the real world again.
Now, this one's actually pretty cool because this is a song that Dez wrote for his son, Tyler.
Okay.
For a band and an album that is so dark and foreboding, it's cool to hear this positive song where he's basically telling his son, hey, man, life's going to get tough. You got to be strong. Keep your head up. I'm a sucker for that kind of sappy positivity stuff. So for me, plus not to mention, they're tuned to drop A flat or something ridiculous, and it's just chugs. And that's another thing is Meigs has I don't know the exact quote, but one time he called his guitar playing style caveman riffs, and they very much are. They're very much the first 4 or 5 frets on the guitar detuned and just jugga jun jun jugga jun jun at different rhythms and stuff. But it works.
Okay.
Not
so
all the time, but when it does work, it's cool.
For anybody listening, I'm sure you know Des is the vocalist. Meigs, and I don't know how to pronounce the last name, Rascon?
Yeah,
He's a guitar player. He's a guitar player and backing vocals, and he played keyboards on Untrue. And then Raina Ross, she's a bass player, and she was actually the wife and mother of his children, of Morgan, the drummer from Seven Dust.
Yep.
And then Mike Bug Cox is on drums. So just because you just dropped Megs, like everybody knew who Megs was.
I mentioned him earlier.
I don't remember you mentioning. You may have, but
because I also mentioned he's the guitar player in Gemini Syndrome.
Okay, I missed that.
I think you spaced out on me there.
I may have.
You have no excuse to be spacing out on our deep cold chamber conversation. Okay, this is the most important thing you've got going on right now. Okay,
shut up. All right, so I do want to know how you are framing, that this is a song he wrote for his son, and it's a positive, uplifted song, because I got very different from that. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe my notes are just out of order and I just put the wrong thing, but the chorus on that is raise your guard again, they don't give a damn. And that doesn't...
Raise your guard again.
Guard. Okay, I heard it as God. And so I was like, there is, and in my notes it said there's an anti-religious message in the lyrics.
Raise your God again. They don't give a damn. Raise your God again.
Because that's what I heard. But guard, I get. I mean,
It's basically
Yeah.
him saying that, like Des saying to his son Tyler, that I'm not always going to be there to back you up and to protect you. You know, but Daddy's always here, and I always love you. But you're gonna have to be strong. You're gonna have to do this because that's something I've struggled with too. Being a musician now with a wife and two little girls, is even if I'm only gone for 4 or 5 days at a time, I don't like it. Like
Yeah.
I love being on stage. I love performing. I love visiting new places, but it just feels weird when I'm doing it without my family.
Yeah.
So I like that song, like lyrically, it works for me.
Okay, I get that. I get that. And now that I know that it's raise your guard again, it makes a big difference to my interpretation of this song.
So now the next couple songs, number 6 is called What's in Your Mind.
Sweet time to the world, you were coming to the dream. I've seen the rib and these lines in my room. Screwed, yeah. For me, it's life. Object for me, it's can't creative this.
And number 7's called Not Living.
I lose, I'm dead, I'm fucked in the head. I'm not living without you. My life's a game, my life's a shame. I'm not living without you. This song has been choked and my life's a joke.
And to me, both of these are just, I don't know. These two don't do much for me. I feel like I like What's in Your Mind at the very end. He actually, there's a little spoken word thing, and then it's followed with some like echoey strings and kind of creepy, and I kind of like that.
To be honest with you, I never got to into that because the beginning threw me off. Now, the whole thing where it's played backwards, it's called backmasking, which reel to reel allows you to record in reverse and play back. Which I think is a fun thing, which actually a lot of people don't know, but if you record on a tape, it doesn't allow you to record on both sides, just on one side. But the reverse side, the other side will actually play in reverse. And I was living with a couple guys that were in a band, and we were listening to a new thing that they recorded in my car on a tape deck, because my car at the time had a tape deck in it. And we went out partying. Yeah, it was real fast. It had roll down windows too. And yeah.
Keep your arms in shape.
Like if you go into a dealership and you say, I want as basic as possible, they would pull out that car that I had. And so we were out partying one night, and the next morning I got my car to, I don't know if I was living with them or just hanging out with them. I know I lived with them at some point. Anyway, but I got my car, I guess to go to work or something, and it was just quiet. I was hungover, and it was, okay, we're just going to go in the quiet of this. And then out of nowhere, it was, and just super loud because, we were listening to it stupid loud. Anyway, I like it when a song is weird. I don't like it when it starts weird and then turns into something different. And so this song started with a weird touch and then turned into a Sepultura song.
Yeah. And then Not Living. It sounds like another Korn rip. It's got the weird high pitched guitars in there. The bass has that, the verses have that rattly bass going on. Just, I don't know. Like this one just didn't do much for me.
It was another one of those where it was, okay, we've heard this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then track 8 comes along. Shock the Monkey.
Darling, please. Hey, monkey.
Yes.
No, but at this stage, I don't think anybody was expecting a Peter Gabriel cover featuring the Prince of Darkness himself, Ozzy Osbourne.
So I feel like, this album fell into where everybody felt like they had to do a cover on an album. And
Yes.
they picked this song for some reason. Okay, so there's different classifications of a cover to me. So you have a cover where somebody plays a song straightforward. It is what it is. They do the same exact thing. They make it their own, or they just do a bad job of it.
And where does this fall?
They did the same thing. They performed the song with Ozzy Osbourne. Like, that's what this is. It was
Okay.
So it had all the nu metal tuning, and
Yes.
so they pretty much went, we're going to make a nu metal Shock the Monkey with Ozzy Osbourne, but you can listen to this version. In fact, I did this. You can listen to this version, and it has the same rhythm. Everything's the same about it, except they just put some distortion on guitars and whatnot. In a best version of where they took a song and completely changed it was All Along the Watchtower. It was a Bob Dylan song that was garbage, which most of his songs are garbage. Monster's nodding his head in agreement. I know he's nodding in silence and not to where people can hear, because it is a controversial opinion to have.
Topic, but I don't care. I think Bob Dylan's one of the most overrated people on the planet.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
Good songwriter for other people. And
yeah, exactly.
And in this case, he wrote All in the Watchtower, and then Jimi Hendrix made it amazing, and then
made it a rock song, yeah.
Right. And then Dave Matthews came along and kind of took Jimi Hendrix's version of it and changed it around a little bit.
I think I've ever heard Dave's version.
Dave's version's not bad, and I'm not a big Dave fan. I mean,
yeah,
his album Under the Table Dreaming was good.
Under the Table and Dreaming and Crash. After that, I sort of lost interest. I like those first two, though.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Under the Table and Dreaming, and I enjoyed it. But I can't tell you last time I listened to it.
But you know what's not on either one of those records?
What?
A cover of Shock the Monkey.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got a little sidetracked there. I'm sorry I threw us off, but
it needed to be said. Bob Dylan sucks. So
yeah,
here's the
all that to say, Bob Dylan sucks.
Yeah. Okay, to your point about cover choices, I feel like you're exactly right. This was the day and age where, especially if you were a rock band or a nu metal band, you put a cover on your album. And it worked for Limp Bizkit. It worked for Orgy. It worked for Alien Ant Farm. Why not?
It worked for Marilyn Manson. I mean,
yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. But here's the thing. Why pick such an obscure song? Like, this was a mild hit back when it first came out, but Peter Gabriel had huge songs.
Yeah.
So, and to your point, if they were going to do something a little weird with it and really like embrace the fact that it's a weird song to begin with,
yep.
I don't know, but you're right. They kind of just play it straightforward, just detuned.
So and I couldn't find this, and I looked for this. I think the reason why Shock the Monkey ended up becoming a thing was because they had Gordy there from Orgy, and he was friends with Ozzy. Gordy been around, played in different groups and stuff. I'm sure at some point he crossed paths with Ozzy, and they just hit it off and became friends. And Ozzy, was actually, I know for a fact that Ozzy was friends with Peter Gabriel. They were not musical friends, but they were just friends. Like they, they ran into each other at parties and stuff all the time. And I think that it was actually that connection that got Ozzy on the album, and then also Shock the Monkey as their pick. Cause it was like, hey, you know what? This would be a fun one to do and a fun one to pull out live.
So around this time, Cold Chamber was a staple on Ozfest, and which came first, the chicken or the egg? I'm not sure, but I know that what's her name, Sharon Osbourne, became their manager around this time.
Okay.
So if she was managing them before, that would also be a way to get Ozzy there. But having Ozzy on your song, especially this kind of like when he had his resurgence and Ozfest was like the biggest thing going, that's a pretty high seal of approval to
definitely
guys not like nu metal,
Definitely. And this isn't really a nu metal song. It's a Peter Gabriel song with nu metal tuning, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's a fun cover. Is it?
Yes.
Is it my favorite track? Not by a stretch.
No, but I think this was a good time for it because I think like said, it's right in the middle of the album. You've been pummeling us for about 25 minutes now. And so now you start to shift a little. So after Shock the Monkey, you get this song called Burgundy.
Did you say make it raining for you? I'd make it storm with the wind like you've never seen before.
That is
Not needed.
somewhere between. But what?
It's not needed. I'm sorry to go from.
Okay, here's what I said. Here's what
All
I
right.
said. It's somewhere in between a song and an interlude, and they could have cut it half the length and just made a little moody interlude like they did at the beginning of the album. I don't think this needed to be a full song.
I don't think it needed to be a full song, and that's where I say it was not needed.
Yeah.
Especially after being hit with a new metal onslaught.
Yes.
And then you get a bizarre Peter Gabriel, Ozzy Osbourne mashup, basically. And and then we go right back into that same sound that we had before.
Mhm.
You can't throw something that sounds so different on an album at me without giving me a palate cleanser afterwards, something to kind of ramp me back up into the next part of the album. It felt very disjointed. And that's where I say that this song's not needed, because this song almost felt like a forcing of their sound back on us.
Now, and I don't know if this is, intentional or not, but this song actually does, Jay Gordon from Orgy does the production on this song. And it features vocals by a woman named Amy Echo. She was the singer in a band called Human Waste Project. They were, if Cold Chamber's B tier, Human Waste Project's like D tier. Like they never really got anywhere.
They pretty much played to the local circuit of things.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I've heard some of their stuff, but it's not anything that I go back to. Like I said, if you come out of Shock the Monkey, you're halfway through the album, you want to put a little 25, 30-second moody interlude right there. Okay, I'm cool with that. But for this to be like 2 minutes long, it just feels unnecessary. Then it goes right back to where we were beforehand with Entwined.
Well, I could take it. You have made me alright to take again. I was willing to break down my will again. I intend to render my sensibilities of all gone right.
Which is, I don't know. This one, I feel like you could have skipped Burgundy if you wanted to do that. Skip it and just go with Entwined, because it does have a little bit of the moodiness with the heavy. So it's a good way to kind of ease back into it.
So for Entwined, I have a couple of notes, but one part really sticks out to me. This song is swampy. This song feels like a new metal swamp to me.
Okay.
It feels thick and watery.
Okay. That's a weird way to describe an auditory medium, but okay. I like it. I like it.
Does that make sense in some way? I don't know if it does. It's just like when I listen to this song, it's just like, it feels thick.
So to your point, if you want to get rid of Burgundy altogether and you just come out of Shock the Monkey into this, it doesn't beat you over the head like some of the other songs do. Right. It's a good sort of ease back into the back half of the record.
Yeah. And with Burgundy, a little Cold Chamber goes a long way. You don't need a whole lot of it. And I felt like with Burgundy, we got more of it. And it's like, I don't need a whole lot more of it. And then Entwined, like I said, swampy and thick, and it's like, okay, we're heavy again. I get it. And then we go into Feed My Dreams.
To make my life, feed my dreams, I'm gonna feed my dreams. Feed my dreams, I'm gonna feed my dreams. Feed my dreams, I'm gonna feed my dreams.
Feed My Dreams It's a funny one. There's not much to it. It's a real simple riff. It's Dez just sounding scary.
It's a solid, fun track.
Yeah,
It's just, it's a very generic, just this is what it is. And I don't feel like I felt like this is a filler track on this one. It's a solid track, but it's a not needed, and especially when we're already dealing with this long of an album. It's solid, it's fine, it doesn't stick out, but it doesn't offend.
Okay, so if I were to say my favorite section of the record is tracks like 2, 3, 4, 5, that my second favorite section of the album is like 12, 13, 14, because number 12, My Mercy.
We are love. We are love. When I die, I'll die with my mercy.
I think they've never done anything else in their entire career like this song. And for me, I think it really works. I feel like there's an atmosphere to this song. Like you were saying, it's swampy on Entwined. This one to me, I feel like I'm like walking through a cemetery at night or something. I like this one a lot.
And I'm actually going to agree with you. This is a standout solid track on this album. And this one really showed me the diversity that they had individually. And I felt like that was one of the first times on this album. I wouldn't say one of the first times, excuse me. I feel like this was a time on the album they were like, hey, we've really been working on ourselves and our abilities to, use our instruments. And then they kind of came together with this. And then you had the production crew on this that were like, hey, we think we can add something. I do feel like the female vocalist on it was maybe
it's Amy Echo again.
Yeah. Was maybe not the best choice, but I don't think it was a wrong choice. But her coming in where she did and the stuff that was happening at the time really gave me an Evanescence feel.
Yeah.
And
yeah, a little bit.
And I think it's funny that that's the feeling that's on this, because Evanescence I've seen labeled as the band that killed nu metal. And I think that's funny. But the ambient spooky sounds that were happening.
Yes.
And I was having trouble pinpointing if it was in the sounds of it or if it was the guitar that had like a church bell feel to it.
Yeah, I just think that's background production, more than anything. But yeah, this is what I meant at the top of the episode where I was saying if they would have fully embraced this, they would have been their own thing more so than just another detuned, pummeling, bouncy nu metal band.
Yeah.
And, hey, I've played in a lot of bands that do a lot of different styles, and sometimes you do something and it was cool at the time, but you didn't enjoy writing it and performing it, whatever. So maybe it's just a personal thing. They didn't like kind of some of the choices they made on this album. But this at least is a breath of fresh air.
It is. It is.
And so then the next couple tracks, No Home.
No home. No home. No home. This
in Cherry Vegas.
lackluster love affair has left you so jaded. Those rings around your eyes that make you look faded. Come say to me that you'll live.
Are back to that nu metal bounce and groove, but I think they're done really well. So with No Home, again, Dez is talking about some personal stuff. It's not very cartoony. It's very matter of fact. He's kind of using an analogy of a broken physical house to describe his broken home. And I think the analogy works. I don't think it's a little silly like some of the other, but it's not as silly as some of the other lyrics.
You're right. It's not as silly, but that shut up and the callback, I'll kick you out, felt very cringeworthy to me. And I lost this song with that. It didn't hold together on that one. But
I don't love that part.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I was saying before is that there's not many standout tracks on this, but there are standout parts to a lot of songs. And whether the standout is a good or bad thing is a different thing altogether. But to me, the shut up, I'll kick you out part, that stood out to me on this.
Shut up, I'll kick you out. Shut up, I'll do you in. Shut up, I'll kick you out.
And it was
Good way.
I feel like musically it would appeal to 13, 14-year-old Danger, but the rest of it doesn't appeal to, actually none of it really appeals to me. That song just doesn't do it for
we've
me.
talked about this on other episodes, and there's a nostalgia factor. There's a certain level of, you dug it when you were a kid, so you dig it now, and certain things hold up, certain things don't.
Yep.
And in the case of the shut up part of Broken Home, No Home, I agree.
Yep.
I agree. It does not hold up very well.
Now,
but
you also mentioned Sherry Vegas.
Yes.
Sherry Vegas is a simple, fun song that I think, again, shows her sense of humor, because the main line that jumps out of this one is, "So pleased to meet you, Sherry." It's such a silly, stupid line that it doesn't, like, it's a straightforward nu metal song. It has nu metal guitar scratches with a stupid, silly line. And it's almost like, with No Home, he put a silly, stupid line in it in a very serious song, which made it hard to, wrap my head around. With Sherry Vegas, it's a silly, stupid line in a song that doesn't pull me out of it.
I think this is a fun one. The riff at the top of the song is a killer riff. Simple, like I said, caveman riffs, but it works. It's got a good groove and a good vibe. I don't know the whole story, but I know it is about Sharon Osbourne. I don't know if this was, I heard it was written as sort of a jab, but if you just take it at surface level, she was their manager, and he's saying, "Pleased to meet you, Sherry." It's almost like a thank you for being our manager.
So from what I have gathered from listening to people talk about Sharon Osbourne, behind closed doors, she's not a gem.
No, she's awful.
Yeah.
What I understand, she is an awful person to have to deal with.
So I could understand if this is a jab. I
That's
that.
what I've always heard too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Notion.
Tear people apart who don't know. It's just a notion that comes to me. It's just a notion that comes to me.
Is another one, like some of the ones we've talked about before, that I like this one. It's heavy. It's got a good groove to it. The verses are kind of weird and atmospheric again. And we have a special guest on this one. Mr. DJ Lethal from Limp Bizkit does some scratching on it.
Which he also did some production work on it, but he, that was his musical contribution was, his DJ scratches. Mm-hmm. This one had a fun drum intro. The scratches were fun. The chorus was a bit repetitive, but it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This was not a standout to me, but it didn't, detract anything from the rest of it. It's a nu metal track.
And then you end the album, Anything But You.
Bullet only trample what you could not choke in life.
It harkens back to songs like My Mercy and Burgundy. It has that, it's a little bit more upbeat, but it still has that kind of dark, moody vibe to it. I can see the fog and the mist again. I like this one. Again, I kind of wish more of the album had more of this in it.
I will say that this was a straightforward nu metal track with a bit of that, what was the track from before? No Mercy, where it kind of had that extra touch to it. And so it was kind of a well-produced, well-crafted nu metal track, which was a smart choice to close the album with.
Yes.
Especially after starting the way that the album did. I thought it was a good song. I thought it does feel a bit repetitive at a certain point, but it doesn't beat you over the head with it.
And I think that, so for me, the track listing is definitely an issue on this one, because I feel like these last 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 are pretty good. All of them are pretty good. A couple of them I think are some of the best on the album, and a couple of them are kind of bottom tier. But there's so much packed into this back half that, like we talked about, if we took out 2 or 3 songs, put something like My Mercy as like 5 or 6 maybe, then you have a little bit more of an up and down ride. Whereas the way it's set up now, it beats you over the head for 30, 40 minutes. And then the back half has all these like dives and movements. And I feel like if they would have just rearranged it a little bit, this could have been a really like something that people actually talked about and was like, man, remember that Coal Chamber record? Like that was nothing like any of those other nu metal bands were doing.
So we had talked before, and I think it came up on the Finch episode, our first episode, where track listings need to kind of be in a certain order so you don't get fatigued and burn out on it. With an album already at 16 tracks, you're running that risk. You threw in a cover of Shock the Monkey that really jumped out and kind of shook it up. That definitely kept it moving, but they didn't hit the marks with keeping this album moving. And that is probably my biggest takeaway from this album is this album loses momentum and feels more like a burden to get through at a certain point. To just sit and listen to. I feel like it would be fine background noise if it like background music if it wasn't something that you were actively listening to. But even at that, I feel like it's still something that you would go, all right, I'm done with this, and change it.
Knock this to about 13 tracks, rearrange the order a little bit, and I think this goes on the shelf with some of those nu metal albums that kind of stand the test of time.
I feel like the overzealousness they had actually hurt them here.
Yes, I think that they made the right decision to go more clean, to add the strings and the atmospheric sounds. I think all of that was the right decision. But then they kind of got, I don't want to say full of themselves, but then they just like they should have stopped. They should have, because honestly, I feel like it happens all the time. People write an album and they write 16, 18, 20 songs, and half of them end up on the album. Yep. And this is a case where hell, put a 12 song CD out that really, really clicks. And then 6 months later, you got a 4-song EP that you can release that people are going to eat up. Or, like I said, rearrange these tracks to make it a little bit more of a ride and not so just one note, and then stop, like bonus tracks. And then, like you said, the one version had 2 more songs. I couldn't imagine trying to listen to 18 songs that are like this.
Yep.
In one sitting.
Now, I never even went and listened to the other tracks because it just didn't seem necessary. And that's the thing. If you're going to put out a special release with extra songs, you want to make it to where you've given them an album where they want to go and listen to those other songs.
Right.
Now, I think that they probably got a bit cocky with having the Osbournes involved, and we're like, you know what? People want to hear more. People want more of this.
Yeah, I can see that being a factor for sure.
Yeah. And maybe this was an album that was recorded at the wrong time and should have been a digital release where they're able to release a song or two just individually and not hurt the album. But what didn't hurt this album was a guest musician that we missed on Sherry Vegas. the panting in the song was done by Georgie the Pug, which was, I believe, the singer's pug.
Yes.
And I just thought that was fun.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we're already kind of in this part. Do you want to give us kind of your closing thoughts here?
Okay. I have mixed feelings on this album. In the musical weight balance, they show heart and musical ability. On the other, they show a pattern of repeating certain song ideas, which become taxing as a listener. It's easy to think they thought the production names would make this album come off better, which shows that they can trust a producer. They were a little right. And thankfully, they're saved at times. And even if that's just by a little bit, they've shown melodic sensibility, which the producers are able to use to their advantage. But overall, this isn't enough. The album, at its moments of big, jittery energy and blunt force trauma, looking back, it was all over the place. When this came out, it worked for me and my friends that had big, jittery energy and wanted blunt force trauma. So overall, I give this album a 4.5.
That's fair. That's fair. Much like Say Hello to Sunshine by Finch and other records we've discussed on the show, this album has a vibe from start to finish. While still having elements of the straightforward bounce and detuned guitar sound that nu metal at the time was known for, chamber music takes it into a moody, gothic direction. It seems that diehard fans of the band view this album as the black sheep of their catalog because it is a huge departure from their debut and both of the records following this one. But for me, that's why I find this album so interesting. The songwriting is a little more unique, the lyrics are a little more personal, and the songs contain far more dynamics and flourishes of gothic production, not nearly as pronounced on their other album. Meigs once referred to his guitar playing as mostly caveman riffs, and that may be true, but where other Coal Chamber records feature almost exclusively those kind of riffs, this one has far more diversity. It has more hooks and choruses with a little more catchy chord progressions, and while not every song is a classic and the runtime borders on just offensive, I really don't understand why this album seems to get overlooked in the Coal Chamber catalog. If you're a fan of that low-tuned chug and groove of this era of nu metal, but you like it with a little more of the dark, gothic, haunted house sounds, this could really work for certain people. Sandwiched in the middle of Coal Chamber's short and solid discography, chamber music is a more diverse outing and more moments to breathe and atmosphere you can dwell in. I think this album needs a revisit from Coal Chamber fans, nu metal fans, and just fans of unique heavy music in general. 1 to 10, I give it about a 6.5.
All right, so that's a 6.5 from you and a 4.5 from me, so that puts us at a 5.5 together.
That sounds fair.
Which, as Cruel as School Children, I gave that album a 7.8, you gave it a 3, which put it at a 5.4. So this album is just by a 0.1 better than Gym Class Heroes.
And I came in hot on that one. I remember.
You did.
Sorry.
You did. Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. I thought about channeling your energy on this album, but
it would have been deserved.
This is not an album that I will ever go back and listen to. This is not an album that I would put into my favorites, even my favorites as a 13-year-old nu metal fan. It's just not.
One, I will say that when I chose this one, this is not one that I listen to from start to finish very often.
Yep.
It's one that I pick 5 or 6 songs and move on to the next thing I want to listen to.
Yep. And that's what this album is as a whole.
Yep.
For
sure.
1 to 2 standout tracks. The rest of it, I'm passing on. And even those standout tracks are they don't stand out real big.
I know what you mean. They stand out real big in the context of the album that you're listening to, but in the greater scheme of things, it's still just a middle of the road nu metal record.
Right.
But for me, especially when it came out, I liked that they were, like I said, the moody, gothic little brother of all the other nu metal bands. While every other nu metal band was wearing Jinkos and Kanga hats, these guys were wearing makeup and fishnet shirts and adding strings and gothic horror to their music. So, I admired the
effort.
the chances they took, I guess. So, Danger, what album will we be breaking down next week?
Well, this week we're listening to Memphis May Fire's Unconditional, and that's what our next episode will be on. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's their lesser known album that I really enjoy. So,
I was going to say there are 2 Memphis Mayfire albums that I have listened to a lot, and this isn't one of them. So I don't know if I've even ever heard this one. I'm excited.
This is a really good album. So
good.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of Breakdowns for Breakfast. I hope you enjoy your day.
Later.